Hey there and welcome back to another Dragon Prince video. Last time I did a theory on the Dragon Prince, I talked about the character Viren, who's been presented as the primary antagonist of the show so far, and how it was likely that he actually murdered Queen Sarai before the events of Season 1 to further his own ambitions. And today I want to continue on that track and talk about some more villainous characters, in this case, Claudia, who I think is pretty soon going to make the transition from minor villain, who's only evil from being loyal to her dad, to the show's primary antagonist surpassing both Viren and Erevos, in what I guess they'll try to frame as a surprise twist, but is really instead something that I think's been set up since Season 1. When we first met Claudia, she's kind of positioned as the primary love interest of the series protagonist Callum, who's pretty enamored with her. At least until he starts to see her use dark magic more and more, sacrificing heaps of cute critters along the way, which ends up creeping him out. And I can't imagine why. Slowly, little by little, she starts to drift away more towards Viren's side of things, eventually siding with him and his army in trying to kill the Dragon Prince, Ezran, Callum, and a whole bunch of other loyalists. Hell, she even picks her clearly evil and deranged father over her own brother. The whole reason she even lived with her dad in the first place and not with her mum was to look out for Soren. And then she just abandons him? And then on top of that, she starts drifting further and further into using dark magic. First killing a deer to heal Soren's paralysis, and then bringing her dad back to life after he fell to his death. And the working theory among large parts of the fandom is that she had to murder somebody to do this, because the power required for the spell was so immense. And that doesn't seem to be the actions of somebody who's being set up for a big redemption arc, to be honest. Sounds like a serial killer origin story. But I can feel you asking, what about Viren and Erevos? Won't they be the biggest villains going forward? And I'd have to answer yes and no to this question. I think at this point it's quite clear to everybody that Viren is going to run out of steam as a villain in the very near future. Even when he was brought back, he looked almost like he was in shock and almost saddened. He didn't strike me as happy to be alive again or ready to claim revenge for his death and continue to go overboard with his totally evil endeavours. There really isn't much storyline left for him other than to get betrayed by Erevos at some point. And that is quite clearly going to happen. There's no chance that the two of these guys are going to be best friends forever and team up to take down the heroes. He's merely going to be a means to an end, and Viren's going to come across as the classic manipulated fool. Once Erevos is properly free, it's going to be all over for Viren. And he's probably going to end up dead again. Permanently this time. And as for Erevos, well, he's clearly being set up for a massive villain role. There's no two ways about that. He's super mysterious and he comes across as charismatic and trustworthy, at least from the villain point of view, even though we know so little about him. And whilst ultimately he's probably going to be the final antagonist that the heroes need to face in my opinion, Claudia is going to be the more emotional villain arc, and will probably be resolved around the same time. Think Azula and Ozai from Avatar. Yes, Ozai's the big bad guy built up throughout 3 seasons, but Azula feels like more of the main villain in a way, because there's so much history between her and the different characters she faces off against. And honestly, I think they're going to follow this formula with Claudia's story. She's going to feel betrayed by her brother and friends for siding against her and her father. She's going to feel even worse when Erevos inevitably gets rid of her dad, and is going to spiral out of control using dark magic more and more as her mental state begins to unravel, much like Viren did in a way, which will of course culminate in her doing some pretty reprehensible things to both humans and elves, and really show how far off the deep end she's gone. And I think ultimately she's going to be an enemy to both Erevos and Team Zim. Honestly, I could see her wiping out a village or something along those lines to fuel some super spell to try and kill a bunch of enemies or dragons or something like that all at once. Especially once she loses her dad, who's the last member of her family left to her. After all, keeping her family together and whole is one of her big character motivations and story arcs. When she inevitably fails at this, I can see her not taking it too well. And on a more meta note, I think her becoming perhaps the biggest antagonist makes the most sense thematically. Of all the characters you could line up to be a reasonable final boss, she's the best candidate. She has a reasonable amount of history with the majority of the main characters, and is kind of a dark reflection of Callum in a way. Whilst he felt that dark magic and killing innocent creatures couldn't be justified, and thus strived to actually succeed at using real magic on his own, she, despite being very talented, simply relied on callously killing animals as she needs to. And, depending on what you think, may have graduated to using humans now. It even twists the knife into the audience, and you get a real sense of betrayal with her turning evil, especially considering how likeable she was in the beginning. Amongst the fandom, she's a bit of a fan favourite, and would be all the more gut-wrenching but also thrilling for her to take such a dark turn. You'd be able to truly connect with the main characters feeling both betrayed, but also feeling sympathetic for understanding how she came to be this way with her troubled past, and knowing who she once was. Plus, I also think it's a nice bit of symbolism for both her, Callum and Rayla. Rayla starts off the show as one of the principal antagonists, at least from Callum's perspective, before quickly becoming his closest ally and eventual love interest. Thus, I think it ties everything off really well if Claudia, who started off as his biggest ally and love interest, becomes the biggest antagonist he has to deal with. So yeah, those are my thoughts on why Claudia is likely going to be set up as potentially the show's biggest villain going forward. But of course, that being said, those are just my thoughts, and now I'd like to hear yours. You agree with me? Yes? No? Maybe? Make sure to leave a comment and let me know.